Hey everyone, welcome back to the Live Life Balanced podcast. I am super excited today to have on Jade, who, for those of you who don't know Jade, she actually is like a sister, like my little sister that I never had, I guess. And although we are a little over a decade apart, we have really cultivated a really beautiful relationship over the last 40 years. So I just wanted to have Jade on because she's a real human being. She's one of my favorite people to talk to on a daily basis, and she's done the work. And so I just wanted to have you on, Jade, so that we could chit chat about how you've gotten to where you are. So for the audience that's listening, could you introduce yourself and just kind of give people a background as to maybe the beginnings of your journey into this whole wellness chapter of your life?
Yes. So I'm Jade Euro. Thanks for the intro.
You're welcome.
Known you my whole life. So wellness, I think it's always been a part of my life. Mostly because of my parents, I'd say, and whether it was out of frugality or what, my mom was just very specific about what she brought in the house. Like we weren't allowed to have soda in the house as a kid. Tang, stuff like that, that everyone that was like trendy snack food, she wouldn't bring that in the house. I used to beg for it. And she was like, no, like Sunny D, no, wasn't allowed to have it. So some things she would let us have every now and again, but mostly it was a no. And my mom cooked every night. So I definitely had that example like early on. And then I was always involved in cheerleading and gymnastics. So that kind of helped, although I didn't know at the time. I think that it was helping me throughout, those early years where, hormones are going crazy and, all of that, that exercise and all of that's really important. But I'd say it really kicked up for me back in 2015, to just become healthier and be more aware because my father-in-law had passed away and he passed away from lung cancer. And I felt really helpless, I think, and out of control and just kind of didn't know what to do. So I turned to running. We had a treadmill that they had actually gifted us. And so it started with walking. I was never a runner, by the way. So I'll say that, like, never a runner and never thought I would be. But as time went on, it was like 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Then before I knew it, I was running 5 miles. And I actually really enjoyed it. And I think it helped me process grief at the same time, but that was just like the exercise aspect. That wasn't even like the food. Then, as time has gone on and my kids have gotten older and you learn more and you have more access with the internet, social media, not that I have it directly, but things like Pinterest, stuff like that, listening to podcasts, you just start to hear more and more and see more with your own eyes what's going on around you in terms of the toxic nature of our world, the food, all the things. So it's just been a journey of discovering that. I think it's always going to be a journey. I don't think there's a destination to get to the end point. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it started.
So, well, first of all, I think you did have a good example. Your mom, I mean, just like my mom, we did cook. We only went out to eat once a week, and that was a special Friday night,
Yeah.
and I remember going with you guys to
The
wherever, but
Chinese
that's
restaurant.
right, the Chinese restaurant up the road. But I think that example does help. I think our world was a little bit different back then. It wasn't as fast paced.
Yeah.
And the nature of most people was that they ate dinner with their families. And
Yeah.
even as a kid, like when we had activities and stuff, there was always a plate waiting when you got home.
Mhm.
It was never like, hey, pick up food on the way home because we ate nothing. It was,
Right.
and the expectation was just that. And I do think, that is something that we can all provide to our children is just that basic example. But I also think that, there are some households and families where there are two working parents and there are the long hours. And because of the instant access we have to everybody, a lot of people don't have boundaries to shut down work. And
Mhm.
so when you're constantly on, lots of things fall off to the wayside. And I think for most people, dinner and that cultivating those family conversations around dinner, a lot of that has become more interrupted because of where we are today. Doesn't mean it should be that way, and doesn't mean not the should, but doesn't mean we can't go backwards. But that's, I think, where a majority of people lie. When your father-in-law passed away, I think, again, a lot of people come into like one defining scenario that changes the trajectory of where they're going. And it's different for everybody. And you did have, a healthy lifestyle. You did exercise and didn't even realize that that exercise was helping you process at a younger age. But as you do get older and you start the work-life balance and you're starting all of that, again, for a lot of people, exercise isn't at the forefront. So with that, like when your father-in-law passed, it's interesting that that was your pivotal moment and you started where you were comfortable, right? You started on the treadmill. You did not, predict that you were going to be a runner. You didn't say you were setting out to run a marathon. You just took that first step, and that step ultimately led you to the next step. And did you ever dabble in diets? I like diet, like Weight Watchers or ketos or any of those things.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to when we're surrounded by it and there's like a new fad. I know like Weight Watchers was always big, and not that so for the audience out there and whoever listens to this, not that I've ever been an overweight or a very large person, but after having kids, of course, and things like that, you really want to get back to, feeling like you, particularly me. I had kids very young. So my body changed dramatically from what I was used to. So yes, definitely tried that stuff. And not to say that it didn't work, but it wasn't sustainable. I think that's the biggest takeaway from any fad or trend that I've seen out there today is it's just not sustainable. And at this phase of my life in particular, and I didn't know it then, but I definitely know it now, it's not about a calorie deficit, I don't believe. It's really about providing your body, food that's nourishing and sustainable, like fiber and protein first, fat, fiber to stay satiated, and now in this phase in life, I'm 41, about to embark on a whole other set of changes in my life, as I have a kid that's going to be going off to college, and then all the fun things that come with getting older as a woman. So you need those things. I need that stuff, like just for my own mental sanity. I can't have the things like I used to. And I think that comes over time too. You have to evolve what you're eating and what you're doing. And I think so many people stay in the same patterns they've always been because they're comfortable. But that's a big part of the problem, is being comfortable. Like we have to force ourselves to do things that make us uncomfortable, and it sucks. But that's honestly the only way that you grow and can move forward and feel good.
Yeah, so true. And I definitely will circle back to that because that's definitely a topic I want to talk about. But one of the things, that you said was sustainable. And I talk a lot about things being sustainable and not sustainable. And like I said, you have to start at a point. You have to take that first step. And if for you, somebody listening, your first step was Weight Watchers back in the day, or it shows you what's possible, right? It shows you that your body does have the ability to fluctuate and that you can get back to a way that you feel good in your body. Yeah. However, when you only do that one specific thing and you're not really changing from a holistic lens, all the parts and pieces, and you're not setting up new habits for yourself, that's what makes it not sustainable. Right. Could you live a certain way forever? Sure, if you're super disciplined and nothing ever rocks your boat. But I've not met somebody that actually has happened yet. And again, I'm not saying it's not, but I'm just saying it's hard. It's hard to sustain a lifestyle where you're deprived. It's hard to sustain. Correct. It's hard to sustain something where you feel like, oh, I can't have that. Yeah. And I think the reframing of that to where it's not that you can't have it, because you can do whatever you want. I mean, you're an adult at this point in your life, right? But how does it make you feel? And so when you actually looked at like the steps you took, each step of the journey gives you an awareness. It gives you knowledge. It gives you something to take and then move along with. And so that's what I think is most important. If you're someone who's maybe never, tried any of the fad stuff, or you've tried a lot of fad stuff, give yourself grace and just know that what positive thing can you take from that experience as you're walking into, a different chapter in your life. And I think that's the second thing that I wanted to hit on is each chapter of life, your body needs different things, you know, just like a machine. When you first buy the machine, it works great. And over time, as you use it and abuse it and do all the things to it, it wears down. And as far as a human in correlation to that, it's like our hormones as we go into that midlife age and hormones start to get rocked and all the things, just like when you're pregnant, you know, you get a whole influx of things. You have to know that you do have to shift, you do have to pivot, and then look at your new body, your new, you know, shell you're given basically, and how do you make that work for you. And I think you said, you know, there are some basic things like fat, protein, fiber. Those are important. So if you are someone who doesn't know where to start, you know, that's a great first step. What I did want to talk about a little bit though is through this journey, especially over the last like 4 years, you know, I've been walking side by side with you. You know, we've been learning a lot together.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, the more that you can surround yourself with people who are talking about it, who are interested in it, you learn because you collaborate, right? Being in community with people really does help. And one of the things you and I started with,
get off your acid.
Get off your acid. Yeah, that was like probably 4 years ago at this point.
It was.
But
It was 2020. It was during the pandemic. And I remember listening to that podcast and being like mind blown.
Right.
Like the things that he was saying.
Right. And then we got the book and we read it. And so, you know, truly there are people out there that are serving people in a way to give good information. You just have to kind of pick through the weeds to find them. Yeah. But that book for a beginner is very, very enlightening. Like you said, it enlightens you, but it's very important to read because it explains a lot about our bodies that we never really learned in school.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. I don't know what we learned in health class, but it wasn't any of that stuff. But that in itself took you from there, you know, and again, you were still kind of working through, and that's what I loved about watching you over these last 4 years, really, or more, but is watching you slowly. You haven't done anything radical. You haven't, you know, starved yourself. You haven't gotten rid of a whole food group. You haven't, you know, felt like you couldn't go have a glass of wine if you wanted to. You know, you did things more mindfully. And you made very small shifts, which, you know, this whole podcast is about 1% shifts for that very reason. By you taking 4 years to go through this process in more of a slow, methodical way of making new habits, what can you say has mostly changed for you, in your opinion, like over these 4 years that stands out most significantly to you?
For the 4 years. So let's see. Well, when a pandemic hits, I mean, I think it just forces you to start to evaluate your life and ask yourself, like, what is going on in the world and why am I here? What am I doing? Like everyone asks. And for me, in all honesty, like it wasn't the worst thing in the world that happened. Like things got to slow down and it forces you, I think, to slow down and reflect on life and what's going on around you, and what you want to put focus and attention to. And that book and that podcast, and as an example, really was like a major jumping off point. Like I'd already been doing the running and knew about healthy eating and all of that, but it took it to a whole different level that I'd never even thought about, talking about just different types of food, what causes disruption in your system and your microbiome, all of that type of stuff that I'd never even thought about. And it was like mind blowing. So you asked the different things that I've done or what stood out to me the most.
Like what stands out to you, like as you reflect backwards, you know, you've done these tiny little shifts, but some of the shifts typically stand out more than the others.
So, well, let's see. Well, I think evaluating what I was eating, because I think we all go through life thinking, again, back to what I said before, you can eat in your 20s, if you're lucky, I should say. And I guess I was. In even my teens, I could eat a lot of junk food and be okay. I had a very fast metabolism. At some point that all catches up to you, right? So that's where you have to pivot and shift and figure out like what works best for your body. So I'd say that it was understanding that, and that if I'm going to have this, that I'm probably going to feel like crap or, you know, worse or not as great or as good as I could. Right. And so it was changing little things over time, like incorporating maybe more smoothies were a big one, actually. That was a big thing I would start with in the morning. But at the time when I was doing it, I wasn't thinking about protein. I was like, oh, a smoothie, that's great. It wasn't until later that I was like, oh, I need to add protein to this. Otherwise, I'm kind of starving my body. But that was like the first step in a big like change. Plus it was easy because I work from home. So, it's easy just to throw everything in a blender, blend it up and like be ready to go and sit back in front of your desk. So that was like one thing, just getting all of the right things in place. And again, I cook pretty much every night for my family. Yes, they're busy. I work from home, so I take advantage of that. And I always have. I think, again, the frugality from my parents and just eating at home. Like, I know if I can cook it at home, I'd rather my kids eat and my husband the food that I've made at home. I think that's just always been the biggest staple for me, as much of a chore as it used to be when they were smaller because you're so exhausted. Now I look forward to it most times, not all the time, but I look forward to it much more. So that being one big thing. What else?
What about your movement? How's your movement shifted?
Oh, so that's definitely changed. Yeah, that was probably back in maybe around the same time or going into that summer. I was just talking to my friend Becky about this. So what's interesting about the story of when I started running and whatever, yes, of course, there was vanity involved, and the goal was that I wanted to lose weight. I wanted to feel better, look better, all of the things, right? Well, I did that, but I didn't feel I didn't feel better. So that was interesting, getting to this place and losing like 12 pounds and thinking, oh my God, I'm basically what I weighed in college, but I wasn't happy. So that was
I want to pause there for 1 second, because I think that happens so often. We go into movement with that vanity metrics, and when we hit that, again, I always talk about how evaluating your goal, like what is your goal? What do you want to feel when you get to the end? And sometimes, exercising doesn't always, it might bring like the scale down, but it doesn't bring what you thought you were looking for. And so I think for you, that was similarly kind of what took place.
Yeah, because your body's different regardless. And
Mhm.
you don't hold muscle the same way that you used to when you're younger. You can't essentially, it's just not the same after having kids. So there are just different things that you need to do. And I don't think I understood that. And I think most women, I'll say, feel like how I felt at that point. Like, what I want to do cardio, because that's how I'm going to lose weight. And if I eat less and do that, well, and that's what I did essentially. And I did lose the weight, but everything was loose. I mean, like your skin is
Right.
not taught to your body, right? So despite being this goal weight, I didn't look how I wanted to, and I didn't feel how I thought I would. So I kind of was like,
But we're
oh,
also fed, like in society, we're also fed a lot of marketing, right? So
yeah,
I'm not going to name any places, but it's like, come here and hit it hard. Come here and, do this. It's a 20-minute, this kind of workout, or here you're up against people in their 20s, look at your board
yeah,
and see all this stuff. It's like that in itself is can be so overwhelming, but also for the people who it's not overwhelming and they do love that and they truly want to go in, they're putting themselves up in a situation that really, if you are in this midlife area of,
yeah,
this chapter, those exercises really aren't really great for you for
yeah,
several reasons. Number one, the whole muscle tone thing, but also it exercise creates a spike in cortisol. And
uh-huh,
so when you are at this age and we've been living lives of high stress for long periods of time because of the way that we all typically live
yeah,
in the United States, you know, we we don't want to do things that are going to spike our cortisol and keep us in that, higher fight or flight all for an hour when
yeah,
we can barely bring it back down because of all the stuff that's going on with our hormones.
yep,
So in this age, exercise, movement will and should look different
yep,
to most people. There are probably onesie twosies here's or there, in this age bracket that, their hormones haven't quite plummeted. It depends on where your hormone levels are. So obviously get those checked. But I would say, this is more of a time for like mind, right? Like
yeah,
mind exercise, connection of body, using your muscles, like those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
Now that you kind of learn that, what are you doing?
Yeah. So I definitely started to understand that more. And so I would say it was about 4 years ago during the summer that my friend gave me her subscription. She was like, try this, because I was like, God, I don't want to run anymore. Walking's great, which a walk in the morning is what I do first thing. And that's great for just the mental clarity and all of the things. So I started Beachbody, and it was really bad when I first started. I felt like I lost all coordination. And I used to like dance and stuff, and then you're like, oh my God, I can't do this. It was awful. I remember feeling so uncoordinated trying to do some of these movements. And I was like, how did this happen? Anyway, so fast forward to now, and that's what I've done consistently is at least 4 to 5 times a week lifting weights. Not
Now, are you lifting 150? You lifting
no.
10? What are you doing?
The highest dumbbells that I have are 20s right now,
Okay.
and that's hard leg day. And it just depends. I really base it on how I feel and kind of where I'm at in my cycle at this point of how much I'm going to lift or what I'm going to push myself to do. I think the most important thing is getting some sort of weight. My goal now is so different than what it used to be just by watching people around me and those that have passed and what has happened to them, and or my grandparents, like my mom's mom and my mom's dad, for instance, that just had an injury that maybe wouldn't have been so bad had he had more muscle on his body.
Mhm.
I'm thinking more future longevity, and when my kids have kids and wanting to be able to play with them and having muscle on my body to protect myself so I don't get hurt. And that's the goal for me now. It's not about losing weight or whatever. And the funny thing is, and you and I talked about this, my weight has remained essentially the same, but my clothes fit totally different now, doing weights and walking. And that's all I do 4 to 5 times a week, weightlifting through Beachbody. And I think that that's also important. People have to find a program that works for them. Some people like high intensity and it really works for them. I'm not one of those people. When I wake up in the morning, my anxiety is so high, I have to bring it down. So I go for a walk first thing in the morning now, which that's a new practice for me. Just because I think of life changes and everything that's gone on. And then I'm doing weights like a little later in the morning to help me. And it's not like high intensity either. It's very slow movements, compounded movements that are more like relaxing, essentially. And occasionally I do like yoga and stuff like that, but that's not on the regular schedule if I feel like it. But yeah.
Yeah. And in another 10 years, we'll have another conversation and we'll see how that all shifts again,
Yeah.
because it will, and that's the cool thing. I think it's like nothing stays forever. And as you evolve and as things change, different things resonate. Like I was not a yoga person until 4 years ago, like
Yeah.
when the pandemic hit, and I was just like, I had done it like here and there, but there was like no connection for me. I just was doing
Yeah.
it here and there. And so when that started during the pandemic, something resonated within me. I was 40, whatever, 44, 46. And I just felt like I needed that for me in order to connect breath to my movement to
Mhm.
calm myself. So that has been for me like a method that I use to help really just calm everything and bring me back to like like balance and
Yeah.
hitting my mat, whether I'm doing yoga, whether I'm just stretching, whether I'm doing my quiet time. My mat is like my sanctuary. It's like I sit down and my body goes, okay, we're back to here to like calm down, and um, so again, everybody finds their own practices. And I think it's so interesting to hear other people's journeys, because you don't know what you don't know until you hear it. And you have to hear it 20 million times before
Yeah.
somebody says it in a way that resonates. And you're a real human being that's gone through stuff, challenges, ups, downs, and all arounds. And you've been able to sustain you created new habits and you've been putting them into practice and you've sustained it because you do it in tiny steps. You don't like create this massive overhaul at once, but also you've tried different things, because you did try, what were those packets like,
Oh,
do that Thrive? No, like where you did the little like program where it was like you ate certain things. It was like a cleanse, I think.
oh, yes, yes, yes. Chroma Wellness.
Chroma Wellness. So, you definitely have listened to things, tried things out, and you are figuring out slowly what it looks like for you. And
Yeah.
that's again, for the listeners who are listening, that's what this whole wellness journey is about. It's not about finding one particular thing that is going to change your entire life. It is about putting pieces of the puzzles together and addressing all different areas of your life, not just the food on your plate, not just movement, but, you know, Jade and I often talk a lot about our minds and finding joy and the thoughts that we have and reframing and the emotional side of things. We're very in touch with like subconscious stuff and like things that we've repressed and put down, and having those conversations. You got to just remember that you're a whole human being with lots and lots of layers of things, all the way back to childhood that you
years of those layers being built and stacked on top of one another. And depending on how you grew up and the type of environment that you grew up in, really, you're still acting out those same behaviors as an adult in a different form. Like, you're not having a full-on tantrum, of course, but if you really peel back those layers to see, that's what you're doing. And I think that as another part of like wellness and exercise and all of that, and this really just dawned on me more recently. It's like I've known it, but until it came into practice for me to really recognize it, I really didn't believe it. And I know I told you this, so I already know that you know what I'm going to say. We're also focused on one goal, losing the weight. I want to eat healthier. I want to do this. It's not really any of that at the end of the day. I mean, it is, but it's all the things have to be working harmoniously. And until you can surrender that and let go, you're never going to get where you want to be or feel happy at the end of, and not that it's the end, or feel content, joy, peace within yourself until you can align. I think it's truly mind, body, spirit, and whatever that means to anyone. And that is being mindful, meditating, prayer, whatever works for you, I think is one of the biggest things. And it wasn't until these last 6 months and then leading up to a point where I felt like I was literally having an out of body experience like every day of my life. It was pretty awful. So to like everything to come to a screeching halt and have to evaluate, okay, how do I get back to neutral? What is neutral for me? I want to feel good. I'm not feeling good. What can I do to feel good again? And what are the things that I need to keep doing? So let's just look at what I stopped doing on the regular, which was working out and doing weights. And I was eating more like refined sugars and things like that. You know, I was like, oh yeah, you know, whatever, I can have this. And yes, you can, not to say that you can't, but you can't consume it, I think, on an everyday basis. That's important to note, right? Like, there's got to be balance in there. And I definitely didn't have balance. And then, you know, alcohol as another thing that definitely, I think, throws you out of whack, and where people don't even recognize it because you're just so used to feeling so like run down and tired because you're drinking it. Those were things I really had to kind of turn the lens around on myself, or the mirror, look in the mirror and be like, okay, you need to get your, can I curse SHIT together?
Yeah, you can. So
together.
This is, and I want to stop just for a very brief moment, because this is all the while you're already like 4-6 years into all of these changes, right? So this is what's called a dip in my vocabulary. It's like, we're on this road, we're doing things, we're feeling a little better, we're making changes, we're physically seeing things, we feel happier, and boom, you're hit with something, right? And that is called a dip because you've got growth to do, because for every dip or every challenge, there's an opportunity for growth. And when you're not given those opportunities, you stay stuck, you stay stagnant. And so we again, we're all growing beings all the time. There is no end destination. So as you get hit, or as you're taken to your knees, or whatever you want to call it, you have an opportunity, like you did, to sit and say, okay, well, here I was, or here I am. What do I need to do, and how do I need to pivot to come up from that dip again? And I do think, and I've talked about this in the other episode about what is a dip, is that when you go through those dips and you have better practices and better things in place, you're able to bring yourself out of that dip more quickly, because you have the tools and you have the mindset of, like you said, turn it around, and what is working for me, what is not. And when we talk about the way you eat very healthy, but even in the healthy world, or even in the clean world, or even in the whatever, sugar, sugar, sugar. It's like, whether it's processed, whether it's healthy, it can all be done in moderation. But you just have, when you see yourself going beyond the moderation and doing it on a daily, it's again, it's how do you feel? That's really the question to ultimately always come back to. When I'm eating this, or when I'm drinking this, it's good in the moment, it feels good, but how do I feel 90 minutes later? How do I feel in the next couple of days?
How
That's
did I
really your
sleep?
right. How did you sleep? Yeah. I mean, how were you the next morning? Did you
Yeah.
feel different? Did you feel like you didn't want to get up and go for that walk or exercise, or, have your quiet time, or, you know, and again, that's like the inward lens.
Yeah.
That's where, the primary food side, I always talk about primary and secondary foods, but the primary side of things is a lot of internal housekeeping, is what I call it. It's like, what are your relationships? Are they feeding you well? Do we need to pivot some of them so that we can open up more space?
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
that's
the
the
la-
heavy stuff that no one wants to deal with. And I particularly don't like to deal with any of that either. As you know, I'd rather just like shove it down and keep moving, which I think most of us do for a long period of life. Like when you're younger and you're not taught how to deal with big emotions, which I definitely was not. And my parents, I think, were like, didn't know how to deal with me. That was just one. And then two, after you have kids, it's like you've got to keep it together, or at least you feel like you have to, because you're in survival mode. And so you kind of put yourself on the back burner in a way, emotionally, I'm going to say, because you have these small people that you're caring for. But the older you get, that all catches up to you, I
Mhm.
think. And that's definitely something that I've been able to see that's come out, hence in this dip, to like look at all of this stuff to force me to move forward and to grow and to go into really uncomfortable places and do things that I didn't really want to do and feel things that I never want to feel, because it's awful. If I'm being honest, I mean, it is, but you have to do it, I think, in order to be able to grow. Uh,
Mhm.
and that's definitely happened. But going back to what you were talking about, food, I've noticed, so I've cut alcohol out of my life for the time being. I don't know that I'll ever go back to regularly consuming. And not that I was a regular consumer. I would say like on the weekends, I'd have like a glass or two of wine, but even so now I just can't. Like it doesn't feed my soul, as I'll say. I wake up and I feel groggy and tired, and I don't want to feel like that. I want to wake up and be able to get after it, get going, and get shit done. That's
Yeah.
like my tagline. My cousin makes fun of me, and she'll probably listen to this. So, but like I'm a get shit done kind of person, and I like to get things done. I don't like to just sit around and like do nothing or feel, and I will allow myself to do that. There are times. It's not to say that I'm constantly on the go, because that's not healthy either, right? Like you just have
Right.
to really listen to your body and your mind and know what you need in those moments. But when I have the energy, I'm going, and I want to be able to go. Um, but alcohol is one, and something that I've noticed more recently too is sugar. So obviously we had Valentine's Day, and then there was the holidays, and I was like, oh, I'll eat a couple of these like candies and whatnot. I slept like absolute crap. Like
Right.
I noticed like those couple of nights where I had consumed, and it wasn't even a lot.
Well, it's not a lot, but for someone who doesn't normally eat
Right.
it, right? And for somebody who has kind of done some work and trained their body to not have it, or not to not have it, but to not crave it, or you're just you're not consuming it. So when you're not consuming it, your body heals, inflammation goes down, things happen. And then when you do put it back in, it you get a much bigger reaction faster.
Well, I was
And
waking up at 3, 4 in the morning, like I
right.
would with wine, essentially. That's what I could correlate it to. And wine, I say that because of people I know, they know it. It's like the wine o'clock. It's like you wake up at a certain sugar, and it's awful. And the older that you get like hotter. You can't sleep. You're like, and it's just ridiculous. To me, it's just not worth it. I sleep 100% has always been a priority for me. And I've always, I feel like, been a good sleeper. I could sleep for 12 hours and I feel phenomenal if I could. Now that doesn't happen on the regular. For me, it's like 7 to 8, but that's necessary. And that's the minimum. Like
Mhm.
that's a requirement for me to be a nice functioning human. I just, otherwise I will not be any of those things. And you just don't want to be around. Ask my husband and kids. So I know that I need that. So whatever I have to do to get that quality of sleep to be the best version of myself, to show up for everyone else in my life, like that's what I have to do. And if that's not eating sugar or having, so be it. I would rather feel good, you know, in my day to day, in my own skin, and feel good about myself and what I'm doing and what I'm able to get accomplished than, you know,
And
couple.
that brings me to the point of silencing noise. You know,
Yeah.
silencing noise of the shoulds and the societal norms
Yeah.
and what everybody else is doing, and, you know, feeling inferior because you're not doing what other people are doing. You know, it's like you've got, again, I know we're years and or a decade apart, but you know, you're definitely a lot wiser than I was ever at that age. But you know, it quieting the noise of the outside, and really it's the internal. How do you feel? What makes you show up your best? You've got to ask those hard questions. And a lot of people don't ask the questions because they know it's going to entail something they don't want to hear or something they don't want to do.
Yeah.
And,
Harder than
you know,
comfortable.
sleep is definitely a non-negotiable. And if you're in perimenopause, menopause, and you're in the hot flashes and all of that, it's terrible because your sleep is affected.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are, you know, a few tricks and things that you can try, you know, but finding out what your labs are is important at that time, because when your sleep is disrupted in the older ages, like when you're having kids and you're a little bit younger, it's not fun by any means, but you
Yeah.
are able to bounce back
Yeah.
differently. Whereas in this midlife chapter, it's really hard to bounce back.
Yeah, you
Um,
need sleep. It's like
yeah,
much more foundational and so much more important, you know, I think it's the first like building block of what you need to set yourself up for success, to have the energy to do those other hard things, to ask yourself those hard things. If you don't have that, you're not going to have much else or be able to push yourself to want to do much else. And you'll have motivation is wavering, right? It's not always there showing up on your door, like ready to fire you up. Like that's definitely something. It's more about discipline. It's a lot harder to have any of that if you don't have good sleep.
yeah, for sure. Um, but I also want to be real here. And, you know, processed sugar is different from whole forms of sugar. And just because Jade maybe doesn't eat processed sugar on the daily doesn't mean she doesn't have a dessert here or there. It doesn't mean, and maybe she makes it healthier at home, or maybe she finds one, you know, things that suffice that sweet tooth that doesn't give her the same effect because it's made out of real forms of sugar and not processed. So there are differences. And again, that's learning ingredients, and that's a whole nother, you know, talk. But when someone says that they don't do something, I think a lot of times when people hear that, they go to they're deprived.
Yeah.
They don't have, they're not allowing, you know, and again, it's a reframe of you can always find a swap for everything, in my opinion. And if it's not feeding you well, then why would you want to do it? You know, so it's again asking those questions to yourself and then listening for the real answer. And then do you act on it or don't you act on it? So sugar and wine were two things that you decided were not working for you anymore.
Yeah.
And, you know, other things will pop up. You know, sleep's a non-negotiable for you, I hear. You know, there are things that you have put into place to show up your best. And again, that doesn't mean you don't hit the dips. It doesn't mean that you don't get smacked in the face with stuff. And it doesn't mean that you're done growing. And a lot of stuff, I think the layering process of how we get somewhere, you know, is ultimately what has to unhappen, which is unlayering. You've got to unlayer all of the things. And I know one of the things you and I have gotten into probably in the last year or so is, you know, the dynamics of what we've been carrying since childhood. And not that either one of us had, you know, horrific, you know, life altering type of childhoods, but you're still impacted. You're impacted by your parents and what they say, what they do. And we're doing the same thing to our children, you know. So just know that as it comes down the pipeline, you know, it's all reverberated backwards. And so I think, again, we put blinders on and we say, well, my childhood was great. Definitely can't be from childhood. But it's like, no, there are things in childhood, dynamics, communication.
Everyone can just blame their parents.
Right, exactly. That's why I tell my kids all the time, when you'll just take
I'm gonna
this,
need
and when
therapy
you're in
one day because I did
when you're
something.
right, when you're in counseling, just remind them that I did that. You know, it's like I said, you know, we kind of joke, but you said something a little bit ago about the kids and like having to put that armor on for your kids and having to show up in a way where you like, kind of mask things and do all the things. And I think around age probably 38 or 40 for me is when I stopped feeling like I had to do that all the time, because I kept thinking to myself, I don't have all the answers. I mean, I'm a mom, but I'm a human, and I'm not all the people in all the professions, right? So I remember as counseling started to come up, I'm like, yeah, you like, counseling's not a bad thing. Talking to somebody and having talk therapy is really good for some people. And I, as your mom, I'm never going to have all the answers, nor are you going to want to listen to anything I have to say at some point, which, we were kind of getting into those years. And I'm like, my job, I feel like right now, is to give you tools and tools of people that you can reach out to, especially when you leave the nest, because when you're at school or you're married or you're whatever, I'm not going to be in your day to day. And I don't know, but if I've provided you at least with, obviously knowing they can always come back to talk to me, but having these other tools and not being afraid to use the tools, and, if if doing quiet time and, reading in your Bible every day, if praying, if that is a tool, that's a tool. If going to counseling is a tool, it's a tool. It's how do you have friends? Like, all of these are different things we teach them so that when they kind of leave the nest, they're able to do the things on their own.
Yeah.
So I stopped kind of, because I sugarcoating everything, but I'm not a very emotional, as we always talk about being, we're definitely cut from the same mold. I don't cry a whole lot. I don't show my like emotions a lot. Some emotions I do, I think, but not all of them. But I'm definitely trying to change that narrative with my kids.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm obviously very similar and have always been up until, the last 6 months. I'd say I feel more like myself since January of this year than I had since last July. So from July to December, for those out there, it was a very trying time and period. There was a lot going on personally, professionally, more with me and how I was interpreting and dealing with it. And I think that's the biggest thing too, and takeaway. We all have the power to, what's the word I'm looking for? Deal with hard situations. I think it's how we show up to deal with it. And what do we have in our toolkit, for instance, to deal with those hard things or moments, right? In order to properly process through those emotions. And or what do we need to do to help us process? Because sometimes it's not just sitting, I think, and feeling. Sometimes there's action that needs to be
Sure.
taken as well. So it's figuring out, again, like what works for you in that. But the kid stuff and the emotional stuff, I feel like for me, because I had my kids pretty young, when they were like going into elementary school, and maybe like when Parker hit like second grade, I was like, oh my God, like I've made it. Like I feel like you feel like a lease on life, and they're talking and they're not toddlers anymore. And you're not worried they're going to like run out into traffic and kill themselves. Like those are the things I always thought about. Again, putting yourself on the back burner and being like, just fully present parent all the time, for your kids. That's definitely stifled some of my emotional well-being and building over the years too, and having to peel back those layers and know that I don't need to wear this armor all the time, that it's okay to be emotional and feel emotions and be okay with that too. It's not a sign of weakness. If anything, I think it's being vulnerable, and that's very hard for a lot of people to do. I don't like to do it. It's uncomfortable. And I'm
Well,
sure,
it is uncomfortable for everybody, it is. But I
yeah,
think when we get the courage and we can be vulnerable, so much goodness comes out of it. Being
yeah,
vulnerable to whomever you feel comfortable with, I think we grow so much in that vulnerability. So I appreciate you saying all that, because I think there are some people that are, scared to be vulnerable sometimes, because that they think it makes them look less than, but really, it doesn't.
yeah,
It's really actually truly says that you're in a place where you feel confident enough to take a risk and find the value in it. And
yeah,
I will say, from some of the things you were saying, like, in those hard, challenging moments over the last couple of months, at the time you were going through them, they didn't feel good,
no,
and again, that's reality. Things don't feel good all the time, but when you can get a little bit of space between you and the thing, and you're able to, like, again, reflect, they were necessary, right? They were necessary for you to take those steps to get to a new step, right? And without those other things that were challenging, you'd still be back like 5 steps. And so I
Yeah.
think, again, it's a lot about reframing once you can get enough space. And I always say zooming out and like being above yourself and looking down, and how you see things differently. I think if you are someone who meditates, if you're listening, and if you're not, meditation is about kind of going above and like getting an aerial view of some things and helping to see it from a different perspective and lens.
Yeah. Being quiet is very hard, I think. And that's why
Mhm.
most people probably don't like to meditate. And I don't like it sounds very woo-woo,
Yep.
I think, to a lot of people, but it's actually not. Like when you look at it as a whole, it's really just being quiet and giving yourself quiet time and space to like sit and just be alone with your own thoughts.
Thoughts. But it isn't about quieting the thoughts. It's about hearing the thoughts, because a lot of
And
times we don't listen to what we're saying to us, like what our mind keeps bringing up. We keep shoving it and shutting it and
we're just putting
rushing.
it in that box. But that
Right.
box is going to come back and bite you. So you
Right.
better deal with it at some point and figure out the best tactic for yourself to deal with it, because I'm here to tell you it's coming one way or another, whether you want to deal with it. So whether that's in a physical form, because you've shoved it down for so long that now you are sick, whether it's in an emotional form in an outburst because of something else that hit on that nerve of whatever that was that you're choosing to ignore, it's going to come, particularly
Mhm.
in this stage in life for women in this midlife phase with the like it's gonna come out.
I do want to reference my podcast episode with Mary Lee, who is the menopause doula. She literally, her statement has resonated with me since she said it,
What
but
you're
it's
gonna say.
the menopause, it is the great reveal. It is the reveal of all things that you have not really dealt with. It's all the
Yeah.
things you stuffed into that box, they're coming back, because you've got to deal with it at some point, because it does make you sick, because it does cause you to not be your healthiest version, because it does not, it doesn't allow you to show up in your most authentic, as your most authentic self.
Yeah.
So I
No, I
think it's
100%
important.
agree. And
Yeah.
I'm at the very beginning stages of like toe stepping into that area of life and can already see
The
the
value.
things. Yeah, well, yes. And it's not fun. It sucks. But I mean, we don't you what's the option? I said, like what are the other options? Like lay down and die and just not deal with it and like crumble, or just keep pretending like it's not happening. I don't know. Like I
That,
can't.
right. And that's your personality. There are some people that, I mean, I don't think they would put it that way, but um they either ignore it, or they
Well,
act
they
like it's
choose
not
to
happening,
feel
or
medicated,
they,
I think. And that's the
well, that
biggest
too.
thing there. That's the biggest thing I think that I had to reconcile for myself, is that having alcohol, no matter how often or whatever, it's like, what am I trying to get away from feeling? And that's really more, it was, when you're young and whatever, it's like to be a rebel and because it's fun. And it was at one point, like, don't get me wrong, I had a blast in college. Like, I wouldn't trade any of those years for the world. But the older that you get, it becomes like this crutch and a band-aid for what you're just not wanting to deal with, whether that's stress from work, whether that's stress from kids. We're always running away and wanting to hide. And I think that that's what I had to. And not that I had a bad relationship with alcohol by any means. Again, it's not like I drank a lot, but at all. But when I would, it was often because you just want to numb out from not feeling the things that you felt all week or the stress or whatever. But it's like, what is the more productive way to get through that? What are the different things that you can do that are in your toolbox to help you process those emotions or the feelings that you're having? And for me, it's exercise for sure. It's sleep, one. Then it's exercise and meditation is what I found. Just sitting quietly, because I have a very busy brain. It's constantly going. It's like saying all kinds of things all the time, but to recognize what those things are and try to,
Awareness.
yeah, shift and change that and not allow myself to get lost in those thoughts is helping a lot. And
Yeah. And so I want to say though, like some people, like they use alcohol for that reason. For me, just again, being bio individual, that's not something that is if I have a drink, it's just because I'm going to something. Like I'm doing that to like get through my week.
Yeah.
or you know what I'm saying. But some people have it with food. Some people have it with the way they talk to people. So, I mean, there's lots of different things
Lots of
that people
vices.
use, right? And vices, thank you. That, you know, it's not just one. I'm so glad that you recognize, though, for yourself that that was one that wasn't working for you, right? That wasn't feeding you in the way you wanted to be fed. For me, alcohol just gives me a headache, and you know,
Yeah.
I'm tired and I feel at the next day. So I socially do it every, you know, but I'm not. It's definitely not something on my radar all the time. Um, but I was just thinking other people use other vices, and that's what I want to say. So for you, it's this, but for someone else, it's something else. It's, I think, the awareness, becoming aware of what those are for you is the first step in anything, is awareness.
Well, and I think we're all so accustomed to it, alcohol in particular, because it's so socially acceptable, but because the
Hmm.
relationship that you have with it changes over time, I
Sure,
think, without you even knowing. Like
sure.
before, when you would drink alcohol, you know, whether you were of age or not, you're more just like being a rebel and it's fun to experiment and like whatever. And in college, like you're going out and it's fun, you're with all your friends, and it's very much a social thing. But the older you get, I think, and particularly when you have kids, and then the more stressors you have in life, that's where you really need to look
Sure.
at why, you know,
Mhm.
are you, you know, running away from something? Is that, you know, because you don't want to cope with like the way that you felt earlier in the week or whatever was going on? I don't know. So I think it changes too, it evolves. So you have to like ask yourself those questions.
Yeah, for sure. Um, okay, so I kind of feel like we've heard a little bit about, you know, how you've gotten from, you know, 2018 to kind of, you know, where you are now. And obviously the evolution has been grand and you're still growing. And again, I want to point out to everybody that it wasn't one particular thing. There
Yeah.
wasn't one, you know, big aha pill that was taken, you know, crash diet that was done, you know, uh, it was all little parts and pieces of looking at things from a holistic lens, from the primary side of things to the secondary side of things, and being willing to be aware, see, and shift. And I
Mhm.
think those are the greatest things that I can hear from you that are good takeaways for transitioning someone's health. And your transformation, again, transformation starts with those 1% shifts and it
Yeah.
just gradually grows. So before we end, I always like to ask everybody who comes onto my podcast for a couple of non-negotiables. Now, obviously, we heard you say sleep for sure. Um, but what are a couple of other non-negotiables that you've set into practice daily? And it doesn't have to be any, it could be a blanket, you know, that you use or do or talk about daily that brings you into your greatest wellness for the day.
Well, it's definitely sleep is a start. Getting good sleep, going to bed at the same time. Like most of the time, you know, if you text me past a certain time, I'm not responding. And it's not even that, it's just I can't have that stimulation that late in the day. So sleep is definitely non-negotiable, but I'm not here to say that I sleep great every night because I don't, you
Sure.
know, and because of that comes the next step, which is getting up and moving my body, like walking first thing in the morning. That's a practice that I put into place a couple months ago. And I think it's just something because my anxiety is so high in the morning. And I recognize that at this phase in my life, it wasn't always like this,
Hmm.
that I need to just get out and like move to help kind of get some of that energy out.
Yes.
No coffee till later in the morning because that spikes your cortisol too. And I don't need any more anxiety than what I already have. And then the other thing is um meditating. It's literally like 10 to 15 minutes just sitting there. And I'm always so worried about like being good at it. And I have really had to like learn to just let that go and to sit there and just let it be what it's going to be. And I think over practice and time, I'm slowly getting better at it, I guess.
Again, I think I'm so glad you brought that up because there's such a large majority of our world that says I'm bad at it. I can't do it. You know, it's all the things, but just even if you start with 1 minute, you know, just, and if your mind wanders, your mind is going to wander.
Yeah.
That's what our minds do. And it's just bringing it back. And if you're going to bring it back to anything, bring it back to your breath and just
Yeah.
concentrate on breathing in and then just breathing out. And it's all just about using it as a tool to release
Mhm.
and to let go. And
Well, and
one
that's
of the
hard.
things, yeah, and
Yeah.
in order to grow though, you've got to let go. You've got to let go of different things.
Yeah. So, you said something about letting go, and I think that it's just important to note, like, that's the biggest lesson over the last couple of months, and I'd say year of my life that's really just keeps showing back up. It's like, you don't have control, so you might as
Right.
well let go, because the tighter I try to hold on, and I know I've told you this, like that resistance that you feel inside of yourself, it just creates more consternation, like within you.
Yeah.
And it's like this brewing of something that you're trying to control, that the universe is saying, you better sit back down and eat some humble pie, because I'm about to serve it to you, because you're not going to control any of this. And that's what I definitely realize. And that's hard. That's a practice. But going back to non-negotiables, I just wanted to make that point, because it's so
Yeah.
true.
So true.
Particularly I think with a lot of women and having kids and all of that. But another non-negotiable is like, I'm always going to fill my cup before I fill anyone else's. And
I love that.
that's just it. Because anyone who's around me, and knows that if I don't feed myself first with whatever it is, so whether that's meditation, walking, doing weight or something for me, I can't show up and be the best version of myself. So, and I know that, and that's not being selfish. That is doing a service for yourself and then everyone around you. Because if you're taking care of you and what's going on with you on the inside and finding your inner peace, everyone else around you is going to feel it.
It's what radiates
Be
out.
so much happier,
Right.
and that's like the biggest lesson and thing that I've noticed and seeing, and where we as women want to constantly go and be pulled and pour into everyone else. But at the end of the day, you're empty. So if you fill yourself back up first and find what feeds your soul and what makes you happy, you're not going to be able to show up as the best version of yourself for everyone else in your life.
Yeah. And again, you being a decade younger than me and recognizing that already is something, I just learned probably 5 years ago. It isn't, not just not selfish. It wasn't even something on my radar. Like it wasn't even something that, back when my kids were little, that I was like, oh, I'm not doing anything for myself. It just wasn't even a thought. It was like, my thought was, I take care of these humans,
Yeah.
and my release, I'd go out with friends and stuff, but it wasn't, I just didn't even have the wherewithal to know that I needed that. And so
Yeah.
I think, recognizing that, if we can pass that down to earlier generations, they'll show up differently.
I feel like they are already so different. I
I
mean,
do.
a big part of my journey has been listening to a lot of other people and podcasts and stuff like that. And a lot of them are a lot younger than me. And let me tell you, they're saying stuff that I would never have thought of. And I'm 41 and they're like 27. So
Right.
I do think that they're coming up and along a lot differently than the way versus how like we were. And I hope to see that shift take place more so.
Yeah, and I definitely think it will. And I just wanted to side note, because you did not mention this, but for the listeners, Jade really has boundaries, and I respect it so much around social media. And she gets on Pinterest. She dabbles in and out of Instagram, but she's like, you'll never know she's on there. She's like incognito, but she doesn't spend tons of time. She has huge boundaries. She does listen to podcasts, but again, when you're listening to podcasts, you're picking and choosing who you're actually physically taking in stuff from. And on social media and all of that, we all know the scroll is real. It's, you get lost. It's nothing, how I always often ask people, and I ask myself this too, how many things do you remember that you saw on social media today?
Yeah, you don't.
Like, and it's like, but if you're listening to something, or you're reading a book, or you're consuming a space with another human being, you feel something, and so you remember that, because those are things that get absorbed into our being, whereas our brains are not able to
Keep up with
even
that pace.
process.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I
Yeah.
will say, for the children, there's good and bad, but I mean, the other day I asked my daughter a question, something about college, and I'm like, you should probably call someone, right? Because that's my mind, that's what it goes to. It's like, you just pick up the phone and you call, and 2 seconds later she's like, oh, here's the video, it tells you everything you just asked me. It's like, whoa, okay, well, I still think you should pick up the phone and call someone, because you're supposed to speak to people, it's like,
Yeah.
but it was very interesting, because my immediate thing was call the person, and hers was, I'm going to get the information a different way. So I think, there's pros and cons, but I think
Oh yeah,
having
to
the
all of it.
boundaries, right, having the boundaries is really something that I always look to you, because you have good boundaries around those types of things, and I appreciate that.
It's for
So
my own mental sanity. I wouldn't be a sane person if I had all of that noise. So that's just for the sake of the world.
For the sake of the world too. Well, we appreciate it. So I want to, again, thank you so much for coming on. And I hope the people that tuned in today, I hope that they're able to see that it is truly just those 1% shifts that do add up to create new habits, new practices, new tools, new tips, things like that. And that is really where you will see your transformation start to take place. So if you have any questions, I always drop people's information in the show notes. So Jade, I'll drop something about you in the show notes and then they can contact you because she's not on social media to follow. But if you are interested in growing and learning, all of the information will be in the show notes. You can jump on my private Facebook page. You can DM me because I love to have conversations with people and see where they're at and where they want to go, because that's so exciting to watch somebody's journey unfold. To me, that's the best thing about what I do. So without anything else, thank you, Jade, for coming on, and I will see y'all next week. Have a good rest of your week.
Bye.